Israel launches a wide-scale military assault in the occupied West Bank as displaced Palestinians return home to Gaza to find everything destroyed. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. The Israeli Defense Forces are carrying out a raid in the West Bank city of Jenin in what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describes as a significant military operation. The Palestinian Health Authority says at least 10 Palestinians were killed, with dozens more injured. The action comes after US President Donald Trump announced he's lifting sanctions against Israeli settlers allegedly responsible for deadly violence in the West Bank. On Monday, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed his concerns about illegal West Bank settlements and worsening clashes.
Israel administrative changes over the past 2 years have streamlined and accelerated the settlement approval process. As a result, control over many aspects of planning and daily life in Area C of the West Bank has been transferred to Israeli civilian authorities. Senior Israeli officials openly speak of formally annexing all or part of the West Bank in the coming months. Any such annexation would constitute a most serious violation of international law.
3 Israeli hostages and 90 Palestinian prisoners, all women and children, were released on Sunday as part of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement reached between Israel and Hamas. Hamas says 4 more female hostages will be released this weekend. For more on the ceasefire and what comes next for the region, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Virginia is Trita Parsi. He's the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Also with us from Virginia is Michael Malouf. He's a former Senior Security Policy Analyst for the United States Office of the Secretary of Defense. From London, we're joined by Abdel Bariatwan. He is the Editor-in-Chief of Rai Al-Yom. And Yossi Meckelberg is a Senior Consulting Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House in London. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Yossi Meckelberg, let me start with you. As we just reported, at least 10 Palestinians have been killed, dozens more injured in this latest offensive by the Israelis in the occupied West Bank. You know, since October 7, 2023, there's actually about 700 Palestinians that have been killed in the occupied West Bank. This is how the Palestinian leader and scholar Hanan Ashrawi describes conditions there. She says every city, town and village is totally isolated with strict military checkpoints that prevent all movement except for Israeli settlers who, with the protection of the Israeli army, attack Palestinians at will. This is Israel's revenge on the West Bank and continuing war on Gaza. Unquote. So, Yossi, what are the goals here for Israel? Is this offensive that we're seeing in the West Bank driven largely, it's a military offensive, but is it driven largely by domestic political concerns in Israel? Is this Prime Minister Netanyahu saying we've not capitulated to the Palestinians in any way?
Hello, good evening. I think there is a mixture here. I think, first of all, because and naturally our attention, our focus was on the Gaza for the last 15 months. To a large extent, what happened in the Gaza was neglected, but as you mentioned yourself, hundreds of Palestinians have been killed. Only yesterday, there was another act of settler terrorism in 2 villages in the West Bank, and this is ongoing at the time that President Trump just removed sanctions on some of these settlers. I think what we see now is a mixture. Part of it has to deal with domestic politics because of the opposition to the ceasefire in Gaza by the far right in Israel. That one party already left, but the coalition, though, Benjamin Netanyahu would like to see them back, so he needs to appease them. Part of it is defensive because one of the things we see is also increase in Palestinians, militancy, terrorism, attack not only on military target but also civilians. So there is an offensive side to that, and some of it is also preemptive because with the release of the Palestinian prisoners, there is real fear within the Israeli security forces, that this will create more militancy in the West Bank. But at the end of the day, what we see right now in the West Bank, it's an ongoing entrenchment of the occupation, expansion of settlement, allowing settlers to behave with complete impunity in their attack on Palestinians. And the end goal for them at the end of the day is the annexation of the West Bank.
And briefly, Yossi, what do you make of the timing of this latest assault in the West Bank? I mean, it comes only days after the ceasefire went into effect in Gaza.
Yeah, and I think, again, some of it has to do with taking what they see preemptive action because of what they expect with the release of the prisoner and ongoing militancy within the West Bank. But yeah, I think as you implied, there are also the fragile domestic political situation in which they need to all the time, in order to keep the government together, to appease the settlers, definitely play its parts too.
Abdel Bari-Atwan, what are your thoughts on what is happening in the West Bank right now?
Well, to be honest, I believe it is the genocide and ethnic cleansing are transferred from Gaza to the West Bank now. I believe Benjamin Netanyahu knew that President Trump will support any annexation of the West Bank to Israel. So I think this is a preparation for the annexation, the preparation for the actually civil war there, or the Israeli to continue the same thing they are doing in Gaza. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, he knows that once he stopped the war, he will finish. He will be defeated. He will be removed. So I think he wants to continue this war as long as he can, to stay in power. This is one thing. Second thing, we know that Ben Gvir, who is the national security minister, he actually distributed more than 200,000 guns to the settlers on the West Bank. And this is preparation for, bloodshed on the West Bank. And I wouldn't be surprised if they kicked out all the Palestinians at the West Bank to Jordan, and to consider it as, the land is of Israel and Judea and Samaria. No Palestinians should be there, or very, very few numbers of them. I think Netanyahu, as I said, he knows that America and the new administration wouldn't actually put pressure on him to stop this genocide in Gaza and genocide in the West Bank now. And the same thing happened in a way or another in Yemen, and also partly in South Lebanon. So I think now the whole of the Middle East now is really ruined by Netanyahu and by his actually desire to control the whole of the Middle East, draw a new Middle East, as he said several times, and also enforce other countries like Saudi Arabia to actually sign a peace treaty or something like that. So we don't know. I think Netanyahu is ruining the whole of the Middle East and creating a lot of bloodshed wherever he goes. 65,000 Palestinians were massacred. Now it is the turn of the West Bank Palestinians.
Trita Parsi, let's look at some of the developments since that ceasefire went into effect on Sunday in Gaza. Hamas released 3 Israeli women, and Israel freed 90 Palestinian prisoners. Hamas says it will release 4 more female hostages on Saturday and Sunday. That's this coming Saturday and Sunday. The ceasefire is holding for now, but we have heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say that it's only a temporary ceasefire. Do you think it will hold?
I think it's quite clear that Netanyahu doesn't seem to have the intent of fully holding it, partly to appease some of the other political elements in Washington. The question is, does Netanyahu have what it takes to essentially defy Trump? Because Trump is now taking some credit and ownership for the ceasefire. And if Netanyahu breaks the ceasefire in a significant way, not in the manner in which the Israelis broke the ceasefire in Lebanon, which had more than 1,500 violations, but nevertheless it was kept at lower level violence, and as a result, by and large, it's not really, it hasn't collapsed yet. But if Netanyahu does something that actually causes it to collapse, and he has no serious ground to blame Hamas for it, then he has created a massive headache for the Trump administration. And I don't see him easily going down that path, because if there's one thing in which he differs vis-a-vis Netanyahu, vis-a-vis Trump compared to Biden, is that he seemed to enjoy humiliating Biden. I don't think he can afford to humiliate Trump in the same manner.
Okay, there have also been some developments, Trita, at the United Nations Security Council. It met to discuss the ceasefire. It pledged to increase humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. Let's listen to the Palestinian foreign minister and then the response from the Israeli representative. Let's watch this.
We reiterate our total rejection of any attempts to annex our land or to displace our people. This is a blatant violation of international law. It violates the principles enshrined by the international legitimacy. We reaffirm the need or the imperative to uphold our legitimate rights and our national identity, which unites our people wherever they are in the world.
This progress comes at a heavy cost. Israel has agreed to release convicted terrorists responsible for heinous crimes to bring our people home. This is a decision no nation should have to make. Yet we made it because we hold life sacred. This deal is not a conclusion. It is a step in the demanding journey to ensure the return of every single hostage.
So, Trita, it seems like this is a very fragile agreement. Hamas, it's believed, still holds 94 hostages. 33 will be released over the next 6 weeks. I mean, how do you see this unfolding without the entire process breaking down?
It's obviously going to be very difficult, and as this process continues, it will become increasingly clear that Hamas, to a very large extent, is still in control of Gaza, and that the promises Netanyahu had made that he would completely eliminate them clearly have not been achieved. But again, if it returns to the type of bombardment of Gaza that was conducted during the Biden term, I think we have to recognize that it's not as clear that the Trump administration actually would provide the weapons and the money for it. I mean, roughly 70% of the expenses of Israel's bombardment of Gaza has been paid for by the United States. Trump said yesterday to the press that this is not America's war, that he didn't express any opposition to Israel, but he made clear that this is not America's war. So will Netanyahu be able to go back to Trump and ask him for more weapons and have the U.S. taxpayers pay for it because he chose not to honor a ceasefire that Trump insisted had to take place?
Michael Malouf, getting back to what Trump said about this conflict when he was asked about the ceasefire, he expressed doubt that it will hold, and as Trita Parsi just told us, he said this is not our war. Let's listen to more of what he had to say.
I'm not confident. This is not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident, but I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the two-state
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
So, Michael, you know, we often hear that Trump is a transactional president. He doesn't do anything without wanting to get something in return. So do you think he will, or Israel rather, would still get this kind of unconditional support that it's been getting from the United States under the new Trump administration?
Yes, excuse me. I think that he will get, Netanyahu will continue to receive continued U.S. support. Trump, as you said, is not confident that phases 2 and 3 are actually going to go into effect. And what's intriguing is that he just never acknowledges the plight of the Palestinians, period. We saw that with the Abraham Accords. They were never factored into the Abraham Accords. Yet he wants to push for Abraham Accords again, resume that. But I think he's going to have limitations, especially if Netanyahu wants to go ahead and use that as a basis then to go after Iran, which he still is keen on doing. Now, you got to consider, too, that Trump, even though he says it's not the U.S. war, he, for all intents and purposes, U.S. fingerprints are all over it because he basically gave Netanyahu a clean bill of health to go ahead and do the annexation based a lot on Marion Edelman's campaign contributions. And that's a very serious development. And he's not he just isn't factoring in whatsoever what will happen to the Palestinians on the West Bank. But he also talked about lovely property in Gaza.
Yeah.
So he's seeing that as a economic opportunity, perhaps for investments, and basically that implies, of course, that the Palestinians would be out of Gaza. So U.S. fingerprints are all over this thing, even though we don't have direct troops involved. But I think there's going to be a limitation. He's going to be having to look to Saudi Arabia for ultimately for further investments and what have you. And I think therein you're going to probably see some hesitation because the Saudis are insisting on a two-state solution. But the reality is, how do you have a two-state solution given the current circumstance?
Right, and looking at that Saudi factor that you talk about, Michael, do you think he will try and expand the Abraham Accords to get Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel, to open diplomatic relations with Israel?
Yes, I think he will make every attempt. He probably, if he can get another $400 billion arms deal to Saudi Arabia like before, he'll work with the Saudis for that. But the Saudis have now, ever since October of 23, the Saudis have now insisted on a two-state solution, and he never addresses that issue whatsoever. And Abraham Accords has totally dismissed that whole idea. And I don't see how the Abraham Accords will go forward unless and until he begins to do something to pressure Netanyahu to help out the Palestinians at some point. But right now, I just don't see it.
Yossi Mickelberg, what are your thoughts on how this relationship is going to evolve? I mean, we do know that Trump sent one of his envoys to Israel shortly before the ceasefire deal was signed, and that particular envoy played hardball with the Israelis. He used what was described as very salty language to tell the Israelis that they've got to comply with the terms of the ceasefire. So where do you see it go to from here?
There is an element of irony here because it was Netanyahu that wished, and also the rest of the far right really wished for Trump to win this election. And I think some of them have a second thought and realizing that from their point of view, from their approach to the conflict, it might have been easier to deal with Kamala Harris. There will be more continuity of Biden, but they are in this new situation. And yes, there is an element of unpredictability. The reality is, without the Trump factor, probably would not have this ceasefire. The single most important element in achieving this was Trump. Because, as you say, sending the envoy and telling Netanyahu in uncertain terms, that's what President-elect then wants, and before he actually assumes power, and that's going to happen. And I think the balance of fear for Netanyahu between the far right and Trump, on this occasion, Trump won. How is going to be translated into first completing phase one in a matter of now less than 2 weeks, starting the negotiation of phase two and implementing it, and most importantly, phase three, which is the reconstruction of Gaza, is still hard to say. Because one of the things, Trump came with a massive agenda.
Yeah.
And a lot of it will create friction at home, but also friction, whether it's in Panama, Canada, Greenland. Is he going to have enough attention span also to focus on such a complex conflict in order to move forward? And this is a question that we don't know the answer. But one more point about the Saudis is, I think the Saudis adhere to the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative that was initiated by Saudi Arabia, that normalization is going to follow a two-state solution. And I assume this will remain the case.
Trita Parsi, what about the relationship with Iran, as far as Israel is concerned, and the United States? Where do you see that going?
I think one of the fascinating things that we have seen from the Trump administration so far is that contrary to a lot of speculation that Trump is going to return to maximum pressure, which he very well may still do. We have not seen any clear signs that he's in any rush to do so at all. The testimony of Marco Rubio during his Senate hearings, he spoke a very different language, not at all as hard as it usually is. We saw that Trump just fired the Brian Hook, who used to be the Iran envoy and who earlier on was out in the media talking about how Trump is going to return to maximum pressure, and he did so on day one. We've seen that there's been plenty of reporting that Elon Musk now twice has been dealing directly with the Iranians on behalf of Trump, including the release of an Italian journalist that had been imprisoned by Iranians, seemingly in retaliation for the Italians imprisoning an Iranian national in Italy at the request of the Biden administration. They managed to quickly resolve that issue, and she was released, and so was the Iranian national within a couple of days. So we're seeing clear signs outside of the rhetoric that Trump seems intent on exploring whether he can get a deal with Iran. Now, whether he can or not remains, of course, to be seen. But he doesn't seem to be particularly eager to return to maximum pressure prior to getting that deal. He may do so if he doesn't get a deal. But prior to securing the deal, we've not seen any clear signs that he's going to dramatically ratchet up tensions with Iran in a destructive way. He may do so a little bit as part of a negotiation tactic, but nothing what we saw in his first term that seemed to really have been aimed at driving things towards a confrontation.
All right, and before we go on, your thoughts, Trita, on the likelihood of the Abraham Accords being expanded?
I mean, Trump has made it clear this is what he wants. The reality, of course, is that circumstances are very different. We have seen an October 7th attack that to a very large extent came as a result of the Abraham Accords, because the Abraham Accords, as a previous guest mentioned quite correctly, really not only ignored the Palestinians, it shoved them under the rug. Jared Kushner openly said that this is a deal that goes beyond, we're moving beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict without actually resolving it.
Yeah.
And the Saudi position has, of course, hardened as a result, at least the foreign ministry. MBS seems to be sending mixed signals. But there's another element of this also that is quite tricky. Biden really tried to get this done, and he continued the expansion of the Abraham Accords, and he took the negotiations with the Saudis to a very advanced level. But in that promise, he essentially offered the Saudis things that I'm not so sure Trump is going to be comfortable offering, such as advanced nuclear technology, as well as a military commitment to Saudi Arabia, a defense pact. That would dramatically increase America's commitment to Middle East in a military sense, which is exactly the opposite of what Trump has been promising the American people. So I think it's trickier than what Trump initially seems to think that it is.
Right. Michael Malouf, do you get the sense that the security picture in the Middle East, in this particular area, has changed quite a bit over the last few years? I mean, we've now seen the Yemenis, the Houthis, get involved. They've been firing on civilian shipping in the Gulf. We've also saw that exchange of fire between Israel and Iran that was during 2023. How much has that changed the security picture in that region?
Well, there have been dramatic changes since Trump was in office the first time. When Trump was in office the first time, there was no diplomatic relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That has changed. And I think the Saudis want to work with Iran, and they don't want to have another conflagration in that region in a way that it's going to upset the balance and create a wider war. And so I think this is why you're seeing, as your other guest pointed out, that Elon Musk has visited Iran a few times, and I understand he has an Iranian connection through the family, through his original father, his birth father. And I think that he purposely has gone to the Iranians to try and work, to try to quietly work something out on behalf of the Trump administration, in recognition that things have changed dramatically in the region, and that's why you see Hook is gone. All the neocons who have been advocating, even Bolton, who have been advocating to go after, to do maximum pressure on Iran. You're not hearing that talk right now, this minute, from Trump.
Abdel Bariatwan, with the ceasefire now in place, Palestinians are beginning to, those who've been displaced, almost 95% of them, are now beginning to move back into the northern part of Gaza. They're finding the place totally devastated, their homes demolished. They're also searching for family members in the rubble of what's left there. There is talk now, a little bit of talk, about rebuilding Gaza. Do you see that happen? And what kind of guarantee will there be from Israel that it won't flatten it again?
Well, I don't believe it will happen. I think it will be only one phase of this kind of ceasefire. I don't believe we will go to the second phase at all. Netanyahu said clearly that Trump and also Biden gave him the green light to resume bombing of Gaza anytime. And also the new envoy of Trump to the Middle East actually shocked us when he said that he wants to send the Palestinians of Gaza, or most of them, to Indonesia. And then the rebuilding or reconstruction will start. I believe this is a very, very alarming to the Palestinians. They are displaced inside Gaza now. They will be displaced outside Gaza. This is the other point, which is extremely important. Trump is interested on Saudi money. He said Middle East is Saudi money. If they gave me $500 billion, I will go to Saudi Arabia and I will strike a deal with them. And he said we have to consider, last time they gave me 450, this time they should give me $500 billion because of the inflation. So this is only what he is interested in. I believe the reconstruction of Gaza never happened. I believe the American or the Trump administration are supporting the Israeli to continue this genocide. The Israeli ambassador in Washington said clearly that Trump is going to give us the giant bomb of 2,000 pounds of explosion to the Israeli. Why they are giving the Israeli this kind of bomb, 2,000 pounds? Why they are giving it? Giving it means there are wars coming, and Israel never actually committed any ceasefire.
Right. Okay, we have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.